Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Charlie Dixon, and today I'm joined by Erin Williamson. Erin is the Chief Programs and Strategy Officer at Love 146, a leading organization working to prevent child trafficking and provide holistic care for survivors. Erin brings over 2 decades of experience in social services and criminal justice, with deep expertise in human trafficking and child sexual exploitation. She holds a master's in public administration, is a licensed clinical social worker, and currently serves on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services National Advisory Committee on the Sex Trafficking of Children and Youth in the United States. Through her leadership at Love 146, Erin is helping to drive innovative survivor care and prevention education programs across the country. I'm excited to welcome Erin back as a part of our Clinician series, where we take listeners behind the proverbial therapy door to explore the strategies and approaches that support mental health. In this episode, we dive into Love 146's mission and trauma-informed clinical work with youth who have experienced trafficking and sexual exploitation, looking at how trust is built, healing is supported across complex systems, challenges and breakthroughs are navigated, and how insights from the therapy room inform prevention, education, and the resources available for parents, clinicians, and communities who want to get involved. So excited to have you back here with us, Erin. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So let's just get started. So for listeners who may have missed our last episode, can you give us a brief overview of what Love 146 is and the scope of services that you provide to youth who've experienced trafficking and sexual exploitation?
Yeah, absolutely. So Love 146 is an anti-trafficking organization. We work with youth who kind of are at risk, at high risk, suspected and confirmed survivors of trafficking. We have a prevention program that's called Not a Number that's in over 30 states. And then we also have a survivor care program that is in Connecticut. And that program provides both kind of short-term urgent services or what we call rapid responses, where it's kind of this quick infusion of services. And then many of those youth go on to receive our long-term services, which are much more in-depth. They both are longer in terms of the length of time we spend with the youth, as well as their families and support systems, as well as the longevity of services. It can go anywhere from 9 months to 2 years. It really does depend on the youth and the family we're working with.
Nice. And I know we talked about this the last time we talked, but I really appreciate that Love 146 brings in the whole family. It's not just that we want to work with just the survivor. You bring in the whole family and try to do some wraparound services for everyone. Being a former educator, it is difficult to navigate that process, and families and parents don't know what to do next. And so having your guidance there, I know, is very beneficial for children and their families.
Yeah, no, thank you. And trafficking is such a weird thing, right? Most people haven't heard about it, right? So they're learning about what has happened to the child in their care, as well as they're supposed to respond to it and support their child. And so I think it's really helpful to have that social emotional learning piece, even with parents and caregivers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you're first meeting a young person who's been referred to Love 146, how do you welcome them into that therapeutic relationship? I know it can be difficult for young people in general to want to participate in therapy services, even more so for children who've been exploited by adults even. So what does that initial contact look like? And how do you introduce yourself and the work that you'll be doing together?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting situation because we do have that kind of single rapid response touch point. And I actually think having something like this, it doesn't have to be this specific, but it helps because we're able to say to the youth, look, this is a one-time thing. We're going to give you some information. We want to make sure that you can make the best decisions for yourself. How we frame it is we work with youth who have found themselves in difficult situations and had to make difficult decisions. And we just want to make sure that you have the information so that you can make the best decision for yourself, right? And we're not saying anything we talk about today has or will happen to you. We're going to share some stories of some things that have happened to other youth that we've worked with in case it's helpful for you to hear this. And so you can ask any questions you might have. And in some ways, opening that up and really doing it in a non-judgmental way and saying, this is a one-time thing, in some ways allows them to offer up space to, well, I kind of actually was okay with that. I like that. I liked hanging. I felt like you got it. You understood it.
Hmm.
I might be willing for more. And so,
Yeah.
I do think giving youth a quick out if they're
Hmm.
not interested is really helpful. We
Yeah.
have been in situations where judges have tried to mandate our services or
Mm.
people have tried to compel services. And we're very clear with both them and with the youth that our services are voluntary, that youth can leave at any time. They can stop services at any time. And I think, especially when you're dealing with trafficking, where youth are really told what to do, when to do it,
Yes.
and they don't have a lot of autonomy and choice. It's really important that in building that therapeutic relationship, you reinforce, always telling them they have choice, they can stop, they can start. You really want to empower them to not just use their voice, but even just recognize that they have one that can be
Right.
used.
Right. And I will say that for young people, it's also not just those that have been exploited or trafficked that don't know what that voice is or that they even have a voice. And so that you guys reinforce that you have one, you can choose whether or not you want to use it with me here or in another place. I know that's got to be empowering and a very positive start to a therapeutic relationship to know that they have a choice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we do a lot of that work, even in our prevention program, right? A lot of it in the adult world, we talk about boundaries a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
For youth, they've never thought about what are my
Mm-mm.
boundaries and how
Yeah.
could those be different with my parents versus my siblings versus my friends versus
Mm-hmm.
teachers and coaches, and really helping them to understand like these are things you get to decide. You get to decide where your boundaries are, when somebody might have crossed those boundaries, right? That's something that's in your power. And I think, unfortunately, we don't have those explicit conversations with kids. We think that somehow
Mm-hmm.
they get it through osmosis. I'm not exactly sure, but the same way many parents and stuff will assume their kid will come to them if they're in trouble or need something. Or they'll say, my kid knows they can always come to me, but they've not
They do
actually
that.
explicitly said that to their child.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a difficult thing. And it's funny. I laugh when you say osmosis because we, as parents, we do that. We think, and a lot of parenting is modeling, right? But some of those things you do have to have the explicit conversation so that the children know that you're there, that you're available for them to be able to talk to. So what are some of the most common challenges that young people are experiencing emotionally, behaviorally, relationally? What does that look like for a child?
So I think initially, a lot of the challenges that our youth experience in some ways are similar to youth of other forms of abuse and neglect, right? It's, are you going to judge me? What are you going to do with this information? And can you handle this information?
Yes.
And we've had so many youth who will disclose stuff to us, and then they will quickly say, I felt like you could handle it,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
in that, they're saying, kind of, they've sized you up, right? And they've sized
Hmm.
other people up. And there were points where they thought about disclosing, but they were worried about taking that burden that they were carrying and putting it on someone else, right? And in
Yeah.
some ways, they're doing that because they're trying to protect people that they care about, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to give it to someone that they think can't handle it. Part of that, developing that therapeutic relationship, especially in the early days, is remembering that youth are going to test you, right?
Yeah.
They're going to see what you can handle, how you react. They're not going to just come out and tell you the worst situation that they've been in and the hardest thing they've experienced in their life, right? That's just not how you build trust and how you engage in a therapeutic relationship. And so it's really important to think about how you respond to those early disclosures, or even more so, how you respond to information that you were given pre-engagement in that session, right? Many of us
Hmm.
know why someone is referred to us, right?
Right.
And we've had youth go into therapeutic relationships and the therapist will say, gosh, you're the first person trafficking I've ever worked with. So we're going to have to
Oh,
figure this
no.
out together, right?
No.
Exactly. That's like a non-starter. That youth
Mm-mm.
is like, well, if I have to explain this to you, how are you going to help me, right?
Right.
And so I
Yeah.
think part of working with this population, or with really any population, is for those of us who are therapists, knowing where is our expertise and where is it not, right? And
Mm,
being okay to say, I can't serve everybody. I'm not going to be good serving
totally.
everybody. This is the population I really have some great strengths to work with. And this is a population where they might be better served by another clinician. And that's not a dig on me. That's just the reality.
Right. Right, right. And being a clinician, it is like you said, it's incredibly important to know where your strengths are and being able to use that in your work, no matter what that population may look like. But I honestly would say it might even be more important when you're working with youth, especially those that have been victimized in some way, because again, they don't have that processing that adults have, and they are going to go in there with a certain level of, can these people even handle this? Or what are they going to do with this information? Can I trust them with what I am giving them? Are they just going to go tell my parents or whatever? And so it takes a lot to build that level of trust, especially with this population. Can you walk us through some of the specific strategies and approaches that you use to earn the trust with young people who've been deeply betrayed by adults?
Yes. And I do want to just, before we get to that, I do want to say this is a population in particular that has a great BS radar, right?
Yes, they
Part
do.
of their survival has
Yes,
been being able to quickly read a situation and read a person and know how to respond, right?
absolutely.
So if you are not comfortable talking about this issue or talking with kids or adolescents, they will read that very quicker than
Very
most
fast.
adults because
Hmm.
they've had to for their survival.
Right,
So yeah, so you're right, figuring out kind of how to build that trust, how to gain that open dialogue, right? Part of it is not pushing, right? And as a therapist, I know it can be really hard. You want to feel like you're having an impact. You want to feel like you're making change and supporting the client or the youth. And so,
yeah,
and I know myself included, right? I have cases where I look back and I go, I pushed that too quickly, too fast, right? And that with this population is just really doesn't work because again, they're going to test you so many times, right? This is not a youth that's come from really positive environments where likely this is the only thing that has gone wrong in their life, right? Kids are vulnerable
right,
to trafficking often because they've experienced other traumas. Other things are happening in their life. They might be food insecure, housing insecure. They might have prior sexual abuse. It might have been system involved, right? And so these are very complex children who have lived very complex lives. Many times they live in complex families and complex communities.
right.
And maybe they're referred to you because of the trafficking, or maybe they're referred to you because of something else. That may or may not even be the most traumatic thing that they identify that has happened in their life,
That's a good
right?
point.
So we've had a lot of kids where their story is horrific, and you would think that this would be the most significant trauma they've experienced. And yet, when you start talking with them, they'll say, actually, it was when I was raped when I was 10, and I went and told my mom, and she didn't believe me. And
Mm,
that was the moment that was the most traumatic, right? And so,
right,
again, I think you can do a mixture of trying to get to know the youth, right? And genuinely being interested. Okay, so what have you done? What have you cared? And then also, hey, look, I'm going to throw out an anecdote, right? Some of the youth I've worked with, they found themselves in really difficult situations. And I just want you to know there's no judgment in this room, right? And you can provide some of that psychoeducation. Adolescence is a time where actually part of your job is to test boundaries, right?
mm,
We as adults should expect. And in fact, you're not in some ways doing your job as an adolescent if you're not pushing back against the boundaries. Now, does that mean go and break every law? No, that's not what I'm saying. But does that mean that we should ever expect adolescents to be perfect? We shouldn't. We should know there's so much research and literature, there's so much talked about. We as adults need to understand and know that your brain is wired to take risks. And sometimes that has resulted in kids I've worked with finding themselves in some really difficult situations. Have you ever found yourself in a kind of difficult situation? You can kind of
mm,
preface them for breaking rules can be normal. Doing things not perfectly is normal, right? This
yeah,
is, you're not going to be judged here, right? And then just again, we have to realize it took these kids a long time to get to the point that they're at.
mm,
It's not going to, our goal is not to fix anything, right?
yeah,
Our goal is to help these youth realize that, yeah, something horrific happened to them, but it doesn't define who they are and it doesn't define who they can become. And
mm,
if we help them to understand those two things, we have had massive success with this population, massive success, because so many of these kids, after they've experienced and they've gotten message from their traffickers and maybe other people as well, oh, this is all you're worth, right? This is all you're good for. This is
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
value in life. This is
Hmm.
what you should expect in life. And so again, helping youth to see you can have a future, you can have autonomy in deciding what that future looks like. Now, I'm not saying there won't be bumps along the way. I'm not saying there might not be setbacks, but to be honest, everybody experiences those.
Right.
Nobody has a sure, certainly some people have it easier than others, right? And what has happened to you was a significant, something very significant that probably will, to a certain extent, impact you for the rest of your life. But you can have some say in how and when and where that impacts you.
Nice, nice.
Respond to it.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I'm not even a young person, but I'm responding positively with the level of honesty that you're displaying in this conversation. Because a lot of times I've spoken with other clinicians and they're like, well, with kids, you kind of have to talk to them differently. And I'm like, no, you really don't. Just speak to them, of course, at their levels, but a lot of times they are more mature, especially children in these cases are more mature than other children of their age. And so having a real honest conversation tends to bring about a much deeper, healthier therapeutic relationship where they feel like, oh, well, they're real with me, so I can be real with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And asking them, like, who else in your life do you feel like you can be real with? Right.
Hmm.
Because that's one of the other things that's really important is a lot of kids don't have enough social support, don't have a safety net of people. Are those kids? Where have you met them? Are they adults? Are there any adults? Are they family members? Right. I can't tell you the number of kids that have massive amount of connections on social media, but cannot identify a single individual
real
they
life.
could go to in their real life if they had an
Mm-mm.
emergency. Right.
Yeah.
And so then guess what? That's part of the therapeutic work, right?
Yeah.
If that kid does not have somebody in their real life that they can go to an emergency, that's a massive risk for
Absolutely.
re-victimization. So part of your work is, okay, well, part of us is we're going to work together, right? We got some time. Let's start thinking about whom we might want to test out, right? The analogy I often use with youth is you have a bucket. Everybody has a bucket. You have a bucket. I have a bucket. Everybody has a bucket. And in that bucket are rocks. And some of the rocks are really big and some of the rocks are really small and pebbles. But those rocks represent everything that has happened to us and every secret that we keep. And the only way to lighten that bucket is to start giving away your rocks. And I'm not saying you have to give all your rocks away to one person. In fact, you probably want to spread your rocks around a little. And I'm not saying you have to start with your biggest rock, but let's maybe pick some people that we could maybe start with some pebbles and see how they react, right? And then maybe if someone's okay with a pebble, maybe we'll try to give them a slightly bigger rock or two pebbles. And then from that session on, you can have all these conversations around, have you shared any of your rocks this week? How'd it go? Who'd you share it with? Was it a big rock? Was it a small rock? And you can have all these conversations about trauma and about secrets without actually having to use those words or go into the details, right? It's really about helping that youth test the waters of exploring deeper relationships and building more social connections.
Very nice, because that honestly led me to my next question. Of course, we as parents, even as clinicians, we want to model healthy relationships for youth, right? So how do we help a youth that has been hurt or is continuing to be vulnerable? How do we help someone to understand what a healthy relationship is and how to build a healthy relationship with an adult when the adult may have been the person that was taking advantage of them from the beginning?
I love this question because I work with a lot of people with lived experience in the field. And when people ask kind of what can you do? A lot of people will say, and these are even for keep your promises. And I always push back on that. And I say, I hear the ethos of what you're saying.
Yeah.
But the reality is no one can always 100% keep their promises, right?
Yeah.
If I say I'm going to come and see you and my tire blows out, I'm not going to make that session, right? I didn't intentionally try to not keep that promise, but life happens. Sometimes things come up, sometimes there are emergencies. And so part of what it is walking that youth. And sometimes it's also walking their parent, right? We have to assume parents don't always have the healthiest boundaries either, or healthiest relationships, right? What is a healthy relationship? Why am I making these decisions? So, look, I know you might be mad at me. I couldn't make session last week. I'm so sorry. I can tell you what happened on my end, but let's talk about it, right? What did you do? Instead of coming to session, what did you do? How were you feeling in that moment? Was there disappointment because you had really hoped to talk to me about something then and you couldn't, right? Were you able to talk to anybody else about that, right? Is there something we could do to make up for it? And so sometimes you're also explaining while you're doing, I'm doing this because I want you to know, like, sometimes we have these disappointments with our friends and family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those can be really, really hard. And,
Yeah.
you know, knowing how to stay in those hard moments and work through them
Mm.
and not just sever that relationship and move on,
Right.
that can be really hard because sometimes it feels easier to just sever, right? It might have felt easier, like, I'm
So,
just not going to go see that therapist anymore because they didn't show up and they knew they were going to piss me off. And right. And so walking them through, I think one of the things I was reading a book recently on adolescence, and it reminded me, I think we as a society and in child rearing and parenting and caregiving, we try to buffer kids from having any hard feelings,
yeah.
right? And that's just not reality. Our goal as parents, as caregivers, as educators really should be to help children learn that it's okay to have a feeling if that corresponds with the event. If it was a sad
Mm.
event, it's okay to feel sad. If someone did something that made you angry, it's okay to feel angry, right? It's how you respond to those emotions and the fact that you can then move on from those emotions to have other emotions, right? You can move on and
Right.
have repair relationships. But when we try to blunt those emotions, we are actually sending a message to kids that those emotions are not okay and that they should do
Mm.
everything to blunt them. And that can lead kids to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to be upset. What do I do to then mitigate that? Do I take drugs? Do I drink? Do I go engage in risky behavior? Do I punch someone? Because one way or another, those feelings are going to come out. It's just whether
Mm-hmm.
or not we allow them out in a healthy way or an unhealthy way.
Absolutely. And being able to teach them in how to respond to negative situations or unwanted feelings and being able to talk through like, okay, let's talk about how you felt last week when I didn't show up or how you felt when I said these things that you didn't really like. We need to talk about how you felt about those. Teaches them not to avoid those negative feelings, but to work through how to say them in a productive way to others. That's excellent.
And that's where working with parents and caregivers can also be
Mm-hmm.
really critically important, right? Because they have to have somebody who then is also okay with that. And
That's
so
true.
many times, and you can talk to the parents about that. It's really hard to see our kids upset. It's really hard. I've had that. My kids come home, failed a test, felt horrible, right? Cried, didn't know what to do, thought that was the end of his life. We had to sit there. We had to work through the reality, right? And talk about how it happened and what we're going to do to mitigate it. But it's okay for him to feel bad if he fails a test. Like
Right.
that's an
Yeah.
okay emotion to feel if you actually failed a test.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Continuing education is both a requirement and a learning opportunity, but finding the right CE provider can be challenging. AATBS, a triad company, offers continuing education for psychologists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, counselors, and behavior analysts. CE courses are available both individually and as part of our new All Access Pass. All Access Pass provides a library of over 250 unique courses. That's more than 800 hours of CEs, with new courses being added every month. As a special offer, Behavioral Health Today listeners can save 15% on CE purchases. Visit us at aatbs.com/BHT and enter promo code BHT15 during checkout. That's aatbs.com/BHT. Check out our library and check off your CE requirements today.
Right. And so even taking that a step further in the clinical sense of this, when a child is stuck in a situation or stuck with a certain feeling, they aren't able to move past it, or even they've restarted communication with the trafficker or left services with you. What strategies are there to help them move through those moments to where, okay, I did something that I probably shouldn't have done or it felt good at the moment and it really wasn't. How do I move past those?
That's such a great question with this population because it happens almost consistently with every one of our relationships, right?
Yeah.
Either a youth will go back with their trafficker for a period or start talking with them again. They'll run away for a period. We've had
Mhm.
youth break up with us that they don't want to see us. We've had it all. And one of the ways that we mitigate that is by preemptively talking about it.
Mm.
And so I can't tell you how many times we've talked with, if we know a youth has ever run away, we automatically have a conversation with that youth and their caregiver about runaway behavior, right? Let's talk about running away. And they'll be like, I'm not going to run away again. I learned I'm never going to do it. I say, that's great. That's awesome. I hope that's true, but it might not be, right? And so let's figure out what might happen if in case it doesn't happen. First of all, right? A lot of the youth that we work with run away. I'm not saying you should run away. I'd obviously be worried about you, but one of the reasons a lot of our youth say that they don't come back is because they don't know what's going to happen when they come back, right? They're worried they're going to be in trouble. They don't know what the consequences are going to be. And so let's talk about what's going to happen if you run away, right? And then we talk it through with the parent, with the caregiver. Who are you going to call? The parent might say, I'm going to call law enforcement. And the parent, okay, well, let's say they come back. What are the consequences, right? First, they're going to lose their phone forever, right? They're never going out again. They're going to be grounded until they turn 18. And then you look at the youth who's like deer in headlights, and you're like, does hearing that, will that make you want to come back if you run? And they're like, no. Right. Okay. So I'm not saying there shouldn't be consequences, right? Sometimes there's consequences for making mistakes, but maybe we can think about what those consequences are. And then the hardest part is when that happens, that behavior happens, holding the parents accountable. Well, I know you're pissed and I know they came back, but we agreed we were only going to take that phone for a week. That's what we agreed. We have to be true to our word, right? But that youth hopefully came back sooner and was less at risk for re-victimization because they knew what they were coming back to. And you can do that with almost anything, right? When we gave my oldest a phone, I remember saying, look, part of this next phase of your life is that you're going to break rules. I'm going to make rules. Me and my husband, we're going to make rules for this house and you're going to break them. That's just, you're going to bend them. You're going to push them. You might break them. I want you to know now, when that happens, not if that happens, but when that happens, the most important thing for me in that moment is your safety, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying there won't be any consequences, but we'll figure those out together. But in that moment, when you've broken a rule and you've gotten yourself into a sticky situation, I want you to remember that the most important thing is not that you broke that rule. It's, are you safe and do you need help? Because I will come and help you. Right? Yeah. Preemptively having some of these conversations then gives kids a sense of what they can do and what might be a safer option when they're stuck in those difficult situations.
Absolutely. It's sounding a bit like some parenting classes going on here to parent, because as a parent, a lot of this is a bit of a trial and error situation, but having to hold yourself accountable as the parents also shows that child how to have a good relationship, how to be in a healthy relationship. These are the things that I said I would do. I'm going to stick with them, and mistakes don't mean that I just won't love you forever. So that's
absolutely
an important part.
One of the difficult things that we have is some of our kids are being raised in the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes the conversations have to have with, okay, maybe we write down what we'd like to see the rules are. So if we do switch homes from one foster parent to the other foster parent, we can think about and preemptively say, it's really worked well for me when I've known what time I'm going to eat. I've known what time you expect me to come home. These are the things that I need to know to be successful, right? In this home. And you can kind of plan with them how they can, because, in the ideal world, it is the parents and it is the adults that are starting these conversations. In the ideal world, kids, to your point, do respond a lot of times to what they're seeing around them, what they're growing,
Mm-hmm.
And so the reality is that sometimes the kids have to start the conversation, right? And so part of what we can do in therapy is, okay, let's come up with a language so that you feel comfortable starting that conversation, right? Let's practice, let's role play, right? And get you comfortable so that you can have that conversation.
Very nice, very nice. You mentioned something that I was kind of curious about too. A lot of your clients are navigating multiple systems at once. So we got child welfare going on, juvenile justice. I mean, these are young people, so they probably are in public schools, mental health issues. What does that contact look like between all of those agencies or with you in those agencies? And then how do you maintain that therapeutic relationship there when you're dealing with so many moving parts?
Yeah, and I can say every situation is different, right?
Mhm.
Some communities are really well coordinated, right? Where you have the school system works really well with the local child welfare system or the local law enforcement or even youth service providers that are available in the area. And sometimes you don't. And sometimes the systems work well, but maybe the individual workers aren't working well. So even there, I think part of what you do is lead by example,
Mhm.
right? And as long as you're able to say, hey, I'm going to talk to you respectfully. I'm going to say, this is my perspective. This is what I'm seeing with this youth. This is what I was shared. I think sometimes we enter into either a power play or we
Mhm.
forget what our lane is and what our lane isn't, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very easy for me to go into a school and point out all the 17,000 things that I would like to see them do differently so that this kid can get services. But I also need to remember that school is serving hundreds of other kids and is trying to make it work. So I can go in and I can say, okay, I'm going to throw out a suggestion. What do you think of this? Would you be able to do something like that? And they may or may not. But I think how you approach it can either oftentimes facilitate or cause issues with whether you're certainly there are some times where you have to go the hard route and you have to say,
Yeah.
this kid is legally entitled to these services or this kid's not receiving what they need and we've certainly had that, right? With kids. We all have gone into this profession with and I generally do believe this. We all go into helping professions because we want to help. The
Yeah.
systems can make it really hard. We can
Mhm.
get burnt out and jaded, right? That's the reality of the helping profession, right? And so I think going back to the ethos of this teacher, this guidance counselor, this law enforcement officer, this project, everyone went into this profession because they wanted to help. And if you take it like, I know you want to help this youth, help me figure out how to help you. You need
Mm.
her to show up at school. I want her to show up at school. I think school is really important. She doesn't like showing up at school because she feels like her science teacher rags on her every time she comes into that classroom. How can
Mm.
we work to approach that science teacher so that they can maybe repair and start a new relationship, right? Or
Yeah.
this youth has been through a lot. They don't want to go to health class with kids their age because those kids also know some of what this youth has been through. How do we get that youth a health credit, right? Without exposing them to what really can be a re traumatization.
Very nice. Thank you for that explanation there. Because you're right, it is so difficult to manage all of those systems. And in a perfect world, it would all just work easily and everyone could share, but that's not what happens most of the time. So
And on
being
the
able
flip
to
side,
navigate. Yeah.
absolutely. And on the flip side, sometimes you have to explain to the systems provider, like, look, I get it. You approached her really nicely and you want to help
Hmm.
her, but you're like the 17th law enforcement person she's come in
Yeah.
contact. And let me
Hmm.
explain to you what's happened with some of the others. So I get it. I'm not saying you're like them. I'm not saying all law enforcement are the same, but I am saying that you have to understand that she's responding to you based on how your colleagues have responded to her in the past. And so you
Okay.
have to understand why she's responding to you that way and maybe give her some grace, right? And maybe even acknowledge, look, I know you've had some bad experiences and that wasn't okay. And I'm sorry that that happened to you. Even if it wasn't you who did it, you can apologize on behalf of the system that
Absolutely.
shouldn't have treated her that way.
Right. Right. Absolutely. I always enjoy a good success story. So, can you share a hallmark success story, one that illustrates what the meaningful progress and healing, what it can really look like for a young person who's come through your program? What were those turning points? What happened? How are they now?
Absolutely. We try not to share too much detail so that
Hmm.
none of our youth could hear themselves, but this is a story that I think there's enough commonality of what many of our youth have experienced and it's really so, we did have a youth who came to us and like many of our youth, we were told they're not going to meet with you. They're very resistant to services. Other service providers have tried. They always renege. And we showed up and they shared the same thing. And we said, look, let us try. Right. And we explained we work with kids who found themselves in difficult situation and had to make difficult choices. And we did our typical rapid response where we provide information. At the end of it, we said, I know you said you didn't want to meet with us, and we promised you this was a one-time thing. We're just going to tell you about some of our long-term services in case you might ever be interested. Right. And sometimes you got to do the exaggeration. Like, I know. And so kind of to make it a little light. So we shared our long-term services, and they actually said that they would be interested. And so we paired them up, and it took this youth a long time, a really long time to disclose what was happening to them. Right. And we don't require disclosure as part of our services, but it got to the point where we weren't working on really anything trafficking related. And I remember saying, we have so loved coming to get to know you and are always here for you. And you know who we work with. And you've said that this isn't something that has happened to you. And I totally respect that. You don't have to disclose it. But if there's nothing really related to any kind of risk behaviors or anything like that, we do have a wait list of youth that are receiving services. And so we just want to know, you can always come back to us. And all of a sudden they thought about it and they go, well, what if something like that did happen to me? And I said, well, I'm really sorry if that's the case. It shouldn't have. I said, you don't have to tell me anything, right? You don't have to, but I'd like to figure out how we can support you, right? And what got you into that, how you kind of ended up in that difficult situation and how we can make it better. We worked with that youth for the next year and a half. And there was family history that was like intergenerational trauma that was related to this work. And we worked with her to not just help her figure out what had happened with her, but a lot of her questions were, am I like my mom, right? How am I different from my mom? How am I the same from my mom? What are the great aspects I want to keep? What are the things I want to be? And you wouldn't have known going into that relationship that it was going to be something where we were talking a lot about identity, right? And identity related to family members. But that was a lot of that youth is not only when we first met with them, were they like, I don't need a high school degree. Why would I ever get a high school? No, I'm not going to do anything. Not only has that youth graduated with a high school degree, which will set them on the course for much better economic stability, which we know reduces re-victimization, but they're also exploring medical certifications that they might be interested in having so that they could even go onto a career path, right? And so here's a youth who was like, so I cannot tell you how resistant this youth was, right? And then was like, fine, you can come and like play games with me. And then when we were like, we really like playing games, but you know who we are and why we're here, right? And then like 2 years later, have such a more grounded sense of who they are, who they want to become, what they can achieve. And I think prior to that work, really felt confused about who they were and felt like they didn't feel like they had a say in who they were, right? That they either were or they weren't this way and they didn't know how to define themselves. And I think that type of work, again, something horrible has happened, does not define you, who you are or who you can become. And as you go and live your life, this thing that feels so big right now will start to become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And so when you're 30 years old looking back, 40 years old looking back, you'll remember it, but it won't feel as gigantic as it is right now in your life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. It is amazing to watch, especially the transformation that it takes. And no matter how long that takes, just to watch it happen is an amazing experience.
It is. It's wonderful. And it's wonderful to see, again, especially when you're talking about intergenerational trauma, which we do see a decent amount with the youth that we work with, to see them recognize that intergenerational aspect of it, and then to start to talk differently about, well, if I have kids, what might I want to do differently? Because then you're hopefully breaking a cycle, right? You're breaking it for the next generation. And there's a lot of research that once you break that cycle, it really can impact multitude of generations going forward, right? And again, it doesn't mean that And we kept saying, it doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It doesn't mean there's no such thing as a perfect parent, but think about and maybe write down and journal about what are aspects of your childhood or your parenting experience you want to take forward, and what are things that you want to leave behind and do differently, and how might that look for you?
Very nice. And you kind of mentioned this, but you're speaking about how the work with the child can really change their futures and the futures of the generations behind them. But I honestly think that it can have even ripples throughout the entire community, because helping one child can help others. The story builds and builds. So is the work that you do in the therapy room, does it inform the education and prevention work that Love 146 does in the schools and the communities, or how is that connection made?
Yes, and I do want to tell a really funny story about how when you were talking about it impacts the community. It's not uncommon for us to go and meet with youth who are maybe hospitalized for a period for suicidal ideation, or living in a group home, or incarcerated, right? And they're in a group setting. So we have oftentimes gone and done these rapid responses where we talk about what grooming looks like, and the staff at these places always say, after we leave and they have their group therapy sessions, they'll always start calling out each other. You know what that sounds like? That sounds like grooming to me. It sounds like what he's trying to do. And they start schooling their friends on like, that is an unhealthy relationship. And we had kids take pictures of our hotline cards and post it and send it out to other friends. We've had kids refer other friends. So you're right. There is this ripple effect of sharing information. It does spread. Kids trust kids in a way that they don't always trust, and listen to kids in a way they don't always listen to adults. In terms of our prevention education work and our training, absolutely. So we revise our prevention curriculum, NAD number, every 3 years. And every time we do it, our prevention ed staff sit down with our survivor care staff and they say, tell us what's happening in the world, right? Tell us, how have things changed? When 10 years ago, we had apps like Kick, right? No one's heard of Kick anymore, right? Right, exactly. It's like a legacy app, right? And the apps that are popular today won't be popular tomorrow. And the way in which online gaming is totally different than how it was before. And we're seeing a lot more recruiting and grooming in the gaming systems, right? And so figuring out, what are youth doing now so that our curriculum can stay relevant? Because certainly if we get up in front of a youth and we show a slide and it has Kick, they're going to look at us like, you're so old.
What is that?
I have
Right.
no idea what you're talking about. They already
We've lost all credibility at that point. Yes.
Exactly.
Because they're already thinking it. But,
Right. And so, like, for example, our most recent curriculum, actually, one of our exercises did AI generated dating. Right. So we showed youth how perpetrators can use AI to create online dating profiles that are completely false, totally AI generated. Right. And then have youth try to figure out which ones of these are AI generated. Can't figure it out here, you're not going to be able to figure it out online. And so just showing them the concept of, at this point, it's not a matter of like picking fake photos. It's like you can completely create an entire profile of who you are through AI and put it online. And those are the type of things and conversations that you need to be at the forefront of. Otherwise, you're going to miss engaging with those youth and having them think that you're actually bringing them reliable information.
Absolutely. Because even as an adult, as a clinician, there's nothing worse than going into a training and the information is not relevant to what is actually happening today, or all the graphics are from the 70s. That does not help us currently.
Right.
It's refreshing to hear that. Yeah.
Or it's like a 101 course and you're like,
yes.
Oh my gosh,
this
if I hear another 101 course, I'm going to, right?
Yeah, this is not it. So that's refreshing to hear that you guys are making sure that you're updated with the newest information, making sure to reach the youth of today, because they are finding out new information. I won't even say every day, it's like every hour or something. And so to be able to reach that in real time is quite impressive.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Absolutely. So switching gears just a tad. So to parents. So when parents, caregivers reach out to you guys, whether they're just concerned about their own child or they want to be informed, what types of questions are they asking? What most do they want to understand about prevention? And how do you guys help them reach those levels?
The most common questions we get are about technology, right? I think that parents feel, relatively more versed of I think we generally have moved on from the stranger danger, right? White van's going to drive by and kidnap you, to the this is where like okay touch, not okay touch. And if anybody it touches you, then it's not okay. Then you can come and tell me. And knowing that that could be a coach, that could be a teacher, anybody. But the online world is just one, it's changing so rapidly. Many parents struggle to keep up. I mean, and I'll just give you an example. My husband's very tech savvy. He does augmented reality and virtual reality for his job, as part of his job, right? So he knows all the systems. He's right, exactly. He's, doing Lego robotics with my kids. And I remember when we first got my kid's computer from school, I was like, we need to shut down our internet. We need to lock it down. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, because he can get on anything. He's like, it's a school computer. They lock it down. And I go,
not at
right.
home.
I handed him the computer. I go, put in vagina. And he lost his mind. He was like, what? He could not believe what came up on my kid's school computer. We ended up calling for somebody who used to go undercover for the FBI to try to figure out how to lock it down. And even he was like, it is virtually impossible. He's like, you can use like a VPN where you send things out and then it comes back. I mean, the reality is the technology is moving really fast and there's virtually no way to quote unquote safeguard your kids from it. And we have this great, I think I might have mentioned it the last time I was here, this great email series for parents of how to introduce technology to your kids. And part of what we say is we equate it to helping a kid cross the street, right? Cars are dangerous, right? You can't take cars off the street. They're dangerous, right? You're trying to help your kid figure out how to navigate cars and what the safest way is to cross the street. You do it at an intersection. You look both ways. Pedestrians are still killed on the road, right? That's still, and so part of this is helping parents figure out, how do I help my kid navigate being online while knowing that shutting it down at this point is not an option. You cannot shut technology down. In fact, I would argue you do a disservice to your child when you shut technology down. Does that mean giving everything to your kid and having no parent controls and allowing them to have the cell phone cuddled up to them next to their pillow while they fall asleep? No, I'm not saying that either. There is a massive gray area between those two. And you need to figure that out. But I do think a lot of parents struggle with that. And I think there's a lot of people online providing parenting advice based on scare tactics. And I think that's unfortunate because I don't think that behooves anybody, parents or kids. I think it causes a lot of anxiety from parents too, who want to do it right. And I think it's hard to hear you can do everything right and things can still go wrong, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And being, like you said, just locking it down to the point where they don't have any access to it at all does not solve the problem, because at some point they're going to have access or they're going to figure it out and be incredibly sneaky about it and not be safe.
Right. And then they're not going to tell you what they're doing and they're not going to tell you when things go bad because you locked it down. They weren't even supposed to be on that thing. And so I think the reality is kids, a lot of socialization happens online, right? Kids text each other, they communicate with each other in that way. And school projects require online work. And so we need to help them know how to navigate not just current technology, but what's coming with AI, and know that they should proceed cautiously, right? They should know that some of this technology is really new and untested, right? We're figuring it out as we build it in many ways at this moment in time.
Absolutely. And so slight switch gears again for you. So for our early career clinicians or folks that are interested in beginning this type of work, supporting survivors of trafficking and exploitation, what type of advice would you give them? What do they need to know going in? What types of skills or qualities are most essential? What types of trainings and things should they look for to be able to be ready to provide the best services?
Yeah, I think if you're starting out, working with kind of an at-risk population is probably the best, to make sure that you're comfortable there, to make sure that it behooves your skill sets. Jumping right in after you have gotten a degree or gotten some training into what is some of the most traumatic, significant, complex trauma with children is not something that I would necessarily recommend. We do have people who we employ who have just gotten their social work degree, but even then, we provide copious amounts of training. They do a lot of shadowing before they're alone with youth. And we do require that they have some experience prior with similar populations at risk,
Nice.
working in a group home, working with runaway homeless youth, there's all these other populations that intersect with trafficking where somebody might have experienced trafficking, but that's not the primary goal of what you're working on with them. You're working
Right.
on something tangentially related. You have to love working with adolescents. You have to love it. Like, you have to find them funny. You have to find them resilient. You have to love that period in life where kids are trying to figure out who they are and who they want to be and where they fit into the world. I personally hated adolescence. Like, as a kid, it was horrible. You couldn't pay me to go back to middle school. But I love being with adolescents during that time because I think I can really empathize and remember with just how challenging that period is. Regardless of what they've experienced, that is a challenging period of life for most kids, right? Most kids remember those years. And then you also have to be able to work with adults. My husband is a pediatrician. He does pediatric oncology. And he says most people go into pediatrics thinking they're working with kids, and they're wrong. They're working with parents, right? And the same is true for therapy. You're working with the kids, but you're also working with the parents. And if you're not comfortable doing that dual work and coming alongside the parents and also really honoring and respecting where they are and where they're coming from and not painting them as the enemy or all good. They're complex people too, just like you, just like me, just like the kids that are in your office. Then I think it can be a really rewarding. It can be an opportunity and career. But certainly adolescence is not for everybody. There are people that love it and people that, again, you couldn't pay the money to work with that population, and just know what's right for you. I feel that way about geriatrics. I think I would not be good at all with the geriatric population. I do not have the patience for that. To each his own.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good to know yourself and what you work well with. Absolutely. So, Erin, I could really talk to you forever, but as we come to a close, where can our listeners learn more about Love 146? How can they access your resources or even get involved in supporting the work?
Sure. So it's love146.org. And we have a ton of resources, including webinars, PSAs, parent caregiver resources. We also we're a nonprofit. And if you want to make a donation, we love donations. But we have a lot of information about our services, the Not a Number curriculum I shared about, as well as you can link to get on our mailing list. And if you're on our mailing list, anytime we develop new resources, we share that out.
Very nice. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Erin, I have really appreciated speaking with you today.
I have appreciated speaking with you as well. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, and more at Behavioral Health Today. And if you like our show, please be sure to give us 5 stars and leave us a review. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.